being recorded, but you still want to participate in this, please let me know. If your camera isn't on and you don't share anything in your voice, you won't be captured in the recording. But if you do want to share and you are still leery about that recording, please let me know, and we can make sure that we're being respectful of your energy and your willingness to be on camera. And so we have a really great slate of speakers here today. Thank you everyone for being here on time and for being engaged and excited about this. I am so excited about our slate of speakers today. We have some really great information, and we do have a little bit of a change to our lineup. It won't be terribly significant, but as we were going through trying to practice for this webinar, we realized there was so much good information here that we are going to rearrange kind of our webinar series overall, but today we're going to have some really exciting speakers. And so it is 1 o'clock now, and I want to give just one more minute for people to kind of trickle in. I wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here. And I'm hoping that you can see my screen. So I wanted to again remind everyone that at the beginning of this webinar, during our presenters, to save on bandwidth, we'd like to have everyone turn their cameras off, and I will be doing that here in a minute too. And we're gonna make sure everybody is muted during that initial presentation part of it, but we will have an opportunity later during our discussion and Q&A period to turn our cameras on and have a conversation more with each other. And so I am really excited again for their speakers here today. And so I am going to get started, and I'm hoping that you can see a PowerPoint that says Climate and Women's Foods. Erin, if you want to just confirm with me that you can see that slide, I would love that.
Affirmative.
Thank you so much. And so I am going to throw this into full screen and we'll get started. So thank you for being here today for our Climate and Women's Foods 5th webinar in our Climate Adaptation Plan webinar series. We have a really great lineup of people speaking here today, and I am so excited for the knowledge that's going to be shared from these speakers, but also from you as attendees and participants and people involved with climate adaptation. And so just really quick, I have a couple housekeeping notes. This webinar is again being recorded and will be made available this evening for viewing on our website. I want to say a huge thank you to Aaron Warden for moderating. He is the one who's letting you in from the lobby, and it's been really helpful to have him working with us on these webinars. I'll go through a little bit later about chat and discussion logistics, but I wanted to just let you know that that chat box is open for you to engage with us a little bit. If you have a question that springs into your mind as you're listening to presenters, go ahead and throw it in that chat box and we will make sure to get to it during the Q&A. But we will also have an opportunity afterwards for us to ask questions in our own voices and with our own faces. And so I'll talk again a little bit more about the logistics of that. And I just want to remind everybody that we're here to envision the future. And so a positive and forward-looking enthusiasm is always really encouraged. And we have a raise hand function if you have something that you want to say or you have technical issues that you want to troubleshoot. And so again, just thank you for being here today. And I wanted to thank Theresa from our Office of Information Technology for being here and helping us troubleshoot anything that might come up during the first little bit of this webinar. We're really thankful for the capacity that they've brought to the tribe for getting things accomplished during this pandemic. It's been really great to have them working for us. So thank you so much, Theresa, for being here. And so now I want to give an opportunity. We are going to have Wenix Red Elk actually give our invocation today. And so I am excited to stop sharing my screen and have Wenix take that away. And again, we are going to ask that during presentations, if everyone could turn their cameras off to save on bandwidth, except for our speakers. We will have a chance to turn our cameras back on later in the discussion period and have a face-to-face conversation, but to save on bandwidth right now is really important. So I am going to let Wenix take it away.
Katalach inam latiwa kahim yuma inam wanikesa Wenix wawakia outbelt. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak and lead us in today. Like we said, we are switching me to another agenda because we have some amazing speakers today. The work that we do to protect, restore, and enhance our first foods, it comes from the beginning of time, our out. You're talking about our first foods. and our traditions that have been handed down from generation to generation. This is the life we were born into as Native people, and our connections to the land and to the food and to these resources run deep. Food and first foods is our medicine that was given to us by the Creator, and it is our reciprocal responsibility to take care of those, to practice the teachings that are meant with them, because food isn't also our medicine. It is a spiritual light that when we take those foods in, it heals us and brings us energy, and it helps us do the work that we need to do for our families. And the teachings and the practices that are associated with those resources are also medicine for our body, our soul, our healing, and our well-being, and the responsibility we have to these. And it's really exciting that we're looking at climate change and the effects that happens with climate change, because climate change affects water, and with the affection of what happens to water, it affects the resources, the place, everywhere that we go to practice those traditional teachings. We have been working really hard as a tribe, as a program, to protect and enhance those resources. And I'm really glad to be able to be here with you today and listen to the presenters. We have a really great group of presenters that are leading forward, and I will go ahead and let them take it away because I know that we don't have a lot of time, and I'm really excited to move forward with that. And thank you for giving me the chance and learning what we have to learn. And in the next series, I'll be able to talk more about the work that we're doing in the Department of Natural Resources to establish those first foods, the work we're doing related to the restoration of those resources, and also working by bringing back our traditions through tribal excursions and bringing back that knowledge to the people and working for our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wenix. That was really beautiful. And so I am going to just quickly let us remember where we are kind of in our order of these webinar series. This is webinar 5. And so we have spent our first webinar was about water, and we have been focusing on our first foods availability and access for these recent webinars. And so this is the last one that's really going to focus specifically on the first foods themselves. And so we have a really amazing slate of speakers. As Wenix said, when we were practicing this, we decided that there was so much information to share that we're actually going to take Wenix's session and move it later this spring to when we talk about climate and health, because a lot of her information relates to really that health connection, that spiritual, physical, and emotional connection to the first foods. And so today we're really excited to hear from Andrew Addessi, who is the supervisory forester for the tribe. And he's going to talk about collaborative forest management that the tribe is engaged with, as well as Jeff Casey is our fire management officer for our BIA Umatilla agency, and he's going to talk about that cross-jurisdictional issues and participation with returning fire to our landscapes. We're also excited to talk about the ecology and culture of women's foods. We have Cheryl Shippentower, our restoration ecologist, here to talk with us about the foods themselves and about the role that they play in tribal culture. And we are so honored to have these some really wonderful speakers, Bobby Fossick and Brosnan Spencer, and of course Meadow from Nagnu Withlama Tichamna, are going to talk with us about some of the work that they've been doing to return the indigenous practices to the land and really live with that Tamanwit. And so I am the least interesting speaker here today, and so I am going to hand it over to Andy if you want to go ahead and take it away. Thank you so much. Oh, you're muted.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Great. Thanks, Colleen, and thanks, Wenix, for the introductions. My name is Andrew Addessi. I joined the CTUIR staff in 2017 as a forester, and since 2019, I've been in the position of supervisory forester. And I'm going to be joined today by Jeff Casey. Jeff, do you want to chime in and just say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Wonderful invocation. Colleen, thanks for throwing this together. My name is Jeff Casey. I'm the Fire Management Officer for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I work quite closely with Andrew and the Natural Resources Department to include forestry and wildlife. And Andy will give you a really great overview of what's going on. And then after he gets done, I got a few slides. We'll talk about prescribed fire and traditional knowledge, returning fire to the land, and then you won't have to listen to him anymore. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm going to try to get my slides up now. And sorry.
We can see your slides and we can hear you.
I think that's not the slide I want, though. Just 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, outline of presentation.
Okay, and it's not in presenter view.
It is, it's full screen.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So from the introduction, one of the key themes that Colleen asked me and Jeff to discuss today was the topic of collaborative forest management, and particularly opportunities for the tribe to co-manage forests throughout the ceded territory using prescribed or cultural fire. But I wanted to give a background concerning kind of the organizational structure of our forestry program and the approach that we've been implementing on the reservation using the tribe's forest management plan and first foods mission. And then later, Jeff will talk more specifically to prescribed fire as well. So the forestry program is housed within CTUIR. We're under the Department of Natural Resources in the Range Ag and Forestry program. I supervise a small team of foresters and technicians, and we're tasked with implementing forest management on the reservation. But we work closely with other programs in DNR on related issues to range, first foods, and other natural resource concerns. My supervisor, Gordy Schumacher, he manages the entire RAFT program, of which Cheryl is one of our staff as well. He's really our resident expert on high-level funding and administrative issues. He's been with first the BIA and now the tribe for the past 20 years or so. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to speak today, so I'm going to do my best to talk about these topics as best I can. So forestry, like many of the programs now managed by CTUIR, is operated under a 638 compact agreement. Essentially, a 638 compact is an agreement that allows the tribe to directly manage a function previously controlled by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So with the 638 compact agreement, the BIA provides annual funding to the tribe for us to operate our staff and to implement our forest management. But in turn, our program has to ensure that all applicable federal laws and codes relevant to managing trust resources are followed. So in 2009, the forestry program was compacted for the tribe, and then it took about 1.5 years of scoping and work with the tribal community, with commissions, with natural resource staff within the tribe to develop a forest management plan. And this was a prerequisite for the tribe to be able to actively manage their own forest land. So the management plan incorporates many values and resources identified as important to the tribe. And we also have to follow all these relevant codes and laws relevant to federal land. So some of these laws include the National Environmental Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, National Historic Preservation Act, among many others. And there's also a series of tribal codes that have been developed in order to ensure that the tribal resource values are protected as well. So all of this is incorporated into that forest management plan. This management plan gives a recommended approach for protecting or enhancing these desired values, and also gives a rough timeline for implementing this work in a proactive and sustained way. However, I'll mention that we do have some flexibility to shift our focus if there's forest health emergencies or wildfires that arise. And later I'm going to show you how over the last several years, many of our projects have been shaped in response to growing insect outbreaks and the risk of catastrophic wildfire. And many of these impacts are only going to be heightened in the face of future climate change. And so it's really important for us to, we're in both kind of reactive and a proactive stance right now. Last thing I'll mention is that there's the funding opportunities kind of shape how we prioritize certain projects as well. And there's just been a real growth in funding available for fuels related treatments based on the rising recognition of the threat of wildfire to communities across the West and across agency boundaries. So here's a basic list of some of the values incorporated into that management plan. and I won't go into all of them, but I'll just say that in terms of timber management, which is an aspect of what we're doing in terms of forest management, we manage in a sustained yield way. The idea being that whatever timber management we do, whatever volume of timber we take from the landscape, we're ensuring that there's growth each year that's going to replace that volume, and so that there's always forest land perpetually on the landscape for the tribe to manage for these diverse values. We also incorporate the First Foods mission, and this has been further refined by the recent Upland Vision document, which kind of a high-level quote is that we're trying to maintain healthy, resilient, dynamic upland ecosystems able to support continued natural production of first foods. And just in general, I see what we're doing through the basic lens of we're trying to maintain forest health, so we're trying to retain resilient stands, and we're also trying to reduce the risk of catastrophic fire potential, wiping out large segments of the forest and some of the resource values associated with that. You might wonder why we even manage forest land. I mean, wouldn't the best outcome, ecologically at least, be just to let the forest grow naturally with minimal intervention? Last month, Lindsay Kiona of our wildlife program did a great job introducing some of these topics of east side or dry forest ecology and some of the restoration focus of this work. She was speaking in connection with some of the work our wildlife program does on the rainwater property in Washington State. And just to kind of recap some of these concepts, the forests of the inland Northwest co-evolved with wildfire as a natural and driving disturbance. And this was in the form of natural lighted wildfires through lightning, or there's also a real growing recognition in the literature of the large scale and frequency of managed fire by indigenous peoples and kind of the scale that they had on the landscape. And they use fire to maintain forests suitable for their culturally important foods and plants. There's a huge body of science recognizing that, in a lot of these forests that we manage, fire burned every 5 to 20 years on a given point of land in some of the drier areas, and in some of the wetter areas, maybe every 20 to 50 years. So pretty frequently. But since the settlement in the area of European Americans, there's been a general policy of fire exclusion. Basically, wildfire is bad, and extinguish all your wildfires, kind of epitomized by the Smokey Bear campaign. So, and on top of that, kind of the timber management of the 20th century really focused on the economics and value of the trees, and so the emphasis is really on removing the large old growth and often fire adapted tree species from the forest. And so what has resulted in all of this is that now we have forest land that's really overgrown with shade tolerant, fire intolerant tree species like grand fir and to a certain extent Douglas fir, and they're much higher densities than historically there ever was. There's a great series of work done to recreate these panoramic photos that were first captured in the 1930s across the Forest Service land of the inland Northwest. And in the past decade, some researchers with the Forest Service have been trying to recreate these photos, and they really give a very clear sense of some of the changes to the landscape that have occurred because of this fire suppression. Here's a photo from the Eagle Cap Wilderness, and in the top you can really see you have a very diverse set of habitats. You have open grasslands and meadows. You have stands of different age classes, but with fire exclusion and with some of the timber activities, what has resulted across the West is forests that are very homogeneous. There's a much greater density of trees and a density of fuels, and overall this poses a large risk for long-term management of these forests, because when fire does happen, you get really catastrophic effects. This is a photo of kind of an old growth stand that might have been common in the 1900s, early 1900s. And this type of forest has really become more rare on the landscape. You can imagine if a fire were going through the stand, it just kind of burn the light litter and grass on the forest floor and leave these larger trees unscathed. Maybe a few of the smaller trees would burn up in the process, but the fire would actually would maintain the stand in perpetuity. And so this is kind of a vision of what an old growth stand might be, and something we're trying to manage to have more of on the landscape. Instead, we have a lot of stands that look more like this, and you could see just how heavily dense it is, and all these trees are stressed for light, for water, for nutrients. And obviously, if a fire started in the stand, very little of the stand might be able to survive. Instead, it might turn into a fire like this. And extreme wildfires are really bad. They can sterilize soils, they can deplete native tree and understory plant seed banks, promote invasive species, and just generally alter the natural succession of this forested area. Not to mention all the negative effects if there's people in communities living near these stands. These extreme wildfires have extremely negative effects, and we've seen that year after year now in these major wildfires across the West. So even if a stand doesn't burn right away, without fire, overly dense stands become really susceptible to different forest health concerns. One of the major ones is insect outbreaks. In this photo, we have represented a western pine beetle. We also see a lot of pine engraver beetle as well in our forests, our dry forests right now. Often beetle outbreaks are secondary agents that kill trees that are already in a general state of weakness or stress because they're in overly dense stands. So the drought stress in these stands is further amplified by the type of conditions we're seeing with climate change, namely minimal snowpack in the winters and above average summer temperatures. And so these these years of drought and little water further make these stands susceptible to beetles. So just to circle back to how our forest management plan tasks us with mitigating these issues while also promoting the other important values that the tribe has for forests. Our overarching strategy is stand density management. So we seek to reduce the density of trees that are growing in overgrown stands to appropriate densities for the site, densities that the amount of water and nutrients in that soil can maintain. But we're also trying to maintain structurally diverse stands that are consistent with the historic structure of these forest lands. And we use what's called in forestry an uneven age management regime, meaning that we don't do clear cutting, except maybe if there's a really major forest health issue in that stand that has to be removed. Generally, we try to do what's called single tree selection. So we're actually going through these forests and we're identifying the types of trees that have the characteristics we're trying to retain, and in the process removing trees that aren't supporting that type of structure. So we favor large diameter trees that are healthy, that are straight, or have good genetics. We favor fire tolerant tree species such as ponderosa pine or western larch. In this process, we're trying to maintain and enhance suitable habitat for first foods. A lot of the important first foods, game or huckleberries or roots, they require more sunlight than is available in these overly dense stands. And so in the process of doing these treatments, we're hoping to improve the habitat for those first foods. Again, we're trying to reduce the buildup and continuity of surface or ladder fuel so that if there is a wildfire, whether human caused, whether a natural ignition from lightning, or whether from prescribed fire, we're not having these negative consequences on the forest, that it's just going to stay to the forest floor and do minimal large scale damage to the stand. And so in all the projects that we do, in all the different types of treatments, we're trying to simulate the structure of a forest that would naturally develop with fire through these mechanical thinnings or hand thinnings. And then as a follow-up, we try to re-implement prescribed fire. This takes care of both the activity fuels that we create in those projects, but is also returning fire to its natural role in the ecosystem. And over the long term, we can maintain a fire schedule every 10, 20, 30 years in these stands. And so we'd actually be recreating that natural fire regime. And another aspect that takes up a lot of my time is when we were doing a thinning in which the trees are of a size that they are valuable as timber, we have to ensure that we're providing a fair economic return for the landowners and following all the codes and laws related to distribution of funds to trust beneficiaries. So that talks about kind of what we're doing and why. You might be asking, where are we working? And so just a map showing you the general forest base on the reservation. We manage about 27,000 acres of forest land. However, a lot of this land is very topographically complex. We have huge river canyons, stringers that are bordered by kind of scab lands and rock outcroppings. And so a lot of our forest is really based on topography, the aspect and slope of the stand. And so that's a challenge for doing kind of large scale management when you have such varied topography. And in fact, probably about 40% of our land base is in a way that it's unfeasible economically to do some of the types of active management which you might try to. And so large areas are set aside just for wildlife in which we're not doing any active management, Esculpa Creek being one of those areas. Another complication of doing forest management is the land ownership. Many of you are familiar with the maps of the reservation, but this highly checkerboard pattern of the reservation is a huge administrative challenge. I mean, there's large segments within the reservation boundary that are in private fee status, which we do not manage in any way, aside from just ensuring that whatever private landowners are living there are following our management plan. There's also a high number of utilities, highways, roads, power lines, and these all further fragment the landscape and make planning and performing forest management really complex. And this is really critical in relation to prescribed fire, because as you know, fire does not respect property lines. And so when we're implementing prescribed fire, it makes it much more important that we ensure that the fire stays where we want it to. And so that's why doing these kind of early treatments are that much more necessary. So under the forest management plan over the last decade, we've begun building our capacity to do proactive forest management. some of the early work involved getting a really good inventory of what our forest resource was, what the stand conditions were. And so we did a lot of what's called cruising or inventory work to establish that inventory base. And a lot of the early work was kind of protecting really high value sites. There's a few aspen stands still on the reservation. And so a lot of early work was trying to protect these stands, trying to remove conifers that were encroaching on the aspens, and then also building these buck and rail fences, which you can see here, which exclude grazing livestock or elk or deer who like to munch on the little shoots of the aspen trees. And so when you remove that grazing pressure, these stands can actually regenerate and grow into maturity again. And then starting about 2014, our program really began to ramp up its ability to manage the forest land. This map you see here will be replicated on a number of slides coming up here just to show you the scale and some of the different projects we've been doing. And our first commercial timber sale was in 2014 on what's called the scattered tracts units. This was an area that was lined out in the forest management plan as kind of the first area to manage for. This project really gave our staff a lot more experience navigating the administrative process for doing commercial timber harvest and implementing it with logging contractors, getting the types of the stand conditions that we're looking for. It was generally pretty simple in that it was just one ownership type. It was just tribal trust land, and it was relatively flat ground. But this is not representative of all of the forest space, but it was a great start for us to learn this process. Also, in the mid-2010s, we started a series of what's called mastication thinning projects, really focusing on the understory trees. The South Reservation near Indian Lake was really affected by spruce budworm in the 1980s, and some of that management to remove the spruce budworm and to salvage the timber that was lost because of the outbreak left stands that are really have a large predominance of shade-tolerant tree species like grand fir. And so these trees can grow really, really thick in the understory because they're so shade-tolerant. And so you can see here on this image in the top right, this is kind of a more or less a before and after shot of what mastication thinning does. So on the left is the stand, and you see it's so thick. The stand has very little wildlife value because of that. There's no light getting to the forest floor and no forage, and animals also just can't really navigate through these types of stands. And so mastication involves using a tracked equipment with like a spinning or disc head on it that grinds these trees and creates a mulch with them. And so it's really great because it takes care of the understory density and also the fuel density as well by creating this mulch layer. So we've done a lot of work on the South Reservation using this type of method. We've also done some hand thinning on Cabbage Hill. Again, hand thinning is effective for the understory. We followed up with some burning, either broadcast or pile burning of some of the activity fuels we created. A lot of these stands also have a high component of larger trees that need to be thinned to get these stands at the correct density. And so we're looking in the next few years at doing a little bit more commercial thinning in these stands to really reduce the density. So I mentioned earlier that wildfires and forest health issues have helped shape where we're going in the future. And one of these was the Waystation Station fire of 2016, which burned about 200 acres of tribal forest land, much of it very severely. And in the following year, our program implemented a salvage harvest, removing those trees that burned up and died and retaining the value for the landowners. And then it gave us the opportunity to replant these stands so that they'll regenerate as forest into the future. Meanwhile, about the same time, it was becoming really clear that there's a growing bark beetle epidemic. And this followed a number of record dry and hot summers, and then further was exacerbated by the Waystation Station fire because those beetles got into those trees that were burned during the fire, and they regenerated and they started spreading to the surrounding stands. And so this problem has continued to grow over the last several years. You can see here an image of the I-84 corridor, and these red and yellow polygons show you the scale of this growing bark beetle epidemic. This is taken from the U.S. Forest Service Aerial Detection Survey, where they fly planes over forest land and detect forest health issues. And this is just an aerial image from Google Maps, and then kind of a stand level image of the impacts of this bark beetle outbreak on these stands. But at the same time, we had some inertia in our program. We were trying to finish treating the rest of the Emigrant Springs compartment as outlined in the Forest Management Plan. And so we started this project in 2018, but had been planning it since about 2015, and just finished this past year, at least the commercial thinning part of it. This project is really notable just because of the complexity of the terrain and land ownership that was involved in it. This map kind of shows you all the different parcels, and a lot of them were embedded in private or industrial forest land, which we had to work with different landowners in order to access these properties and to be able to do this management. But I think it was very successful given all this complexity that we're able to carry out this project. And it was also notable because of the terrain. This was the first commercial timber harvest that, as far as I know, has been done on the reservation that involved really steep terrain. We had some challenges getting an operator who was able to have the equipment and make it feasible for them to do the type of thinning treatment. But one of our local logging companies was able to invest specifically in machinery capable of doing this type of work. Now, this image in the top left shows you this machinery. That the image is not from our ground because it shows a clear-cut operation, but it gives you a sense of the type of machinery being used, and basically a machine suspended by a cable to an anchoring machine that's able to descend these steep slopes. These pictures on the lower portion of the slide show you that we were effective in getting kind of this uneven age management regime using this type of harvesting equipment. So I think it was a great success in that regard. Now following up, we're going to continue on, and we've been laying out some commercial thinning blocks just to the west of Emigrant Springs in what's called the North Fork Mackay compartment. Again, these are some of the stands that have been most heavily impacted by bark beetle, and so we're trying to, we're trying to get whatever value for the dead trees that have for the landowners, and also to protect the stands that are adjacent to it by doing proactive thinning so that they can resist that pressure of bark beetles. And here's a map of the area if you're interested to come back and take a look at a little bit more detail at our logging plan for it. But in total, it'll be about 850 acres of commercial thinning. Another project I'm excited about that's coming up this year is we got funding for a pre-commercial thinning and road brushing project on what's called Blue Kettle Ridge, what we call Blue Kettle Ridge. This is the northernmost area on the southern reservation block. Basically, the area the road has become so overgrown from vegetation that it's basically inaccessible by car or truck. So a major emphasis is just brushing the road out and creating a little bit of a fuel break around the road. And then we're also going to do some proactive pre-commercial thinning in some of the overgrown stands. And so hopefully this will allow for, if there ever is a need for fire suppression in this area, folks to access it. But also we really just want tribal members to be able to access this area because there's some great gathering areas and hunting areas in this part of the reservation that have been previously pretty inaccessible. A final thing I'll talk about is the Reserve Treaty Rights Lands Project. Essentially, this is a grant program through the BIA, which has come online in the last few years, and it gives funding to treat lands that are not necessarily trust lands, but that are of high tribal priority that are adjacent or within tribal boundaries. So as I mentioned before, the land ownership, we have a lot of land that's been recently purchased by the tribe over the last decade or so that's in what's called tribal fee status. And we don't get any direct annual funding to manage those lands because they're not trust lands. And so this RTRL grant program has really bridged that gap, giving us funding to do forest management on these tribal fee lands within the reservation boundary. But moving forward, we certainly could be able to get projects funded through this grant program on lands just off reservation, maybe in federal ownership. So we're excited about this opportunity. And we've had 3 major projects funded under this: the Telephone Burns RTRL, and the 4th RTRL, which is just coming online now. And then the Wildlife Program spoke about the Rainwater RTRL project they're carrying out. And just some images and maps. One thing I'll mention when we're trying to implement prescribed fire, the forest treatment is really important, but also sometimes we need to create containment lines to ensure the fire goes where we want it. And so this photo in the top left shows you an image of using a skid steer to create some pretty shallow containment lines that we could burn off of. And that way, we don't burn over onto private lands or state lands, like in the lower left, where the Burns properties are surrounded by different ownership types that we really want to make sure we don't accidentally burn over onto. And then the bottom right shows you the plan for the 4th RTRL project. Essentially, we're going to be implementing about 500 acres of thinning or forest treatments every year, and then following up with prescribed fire. And over about 5 years, we'll treat about 2,000 acres this way. And then just to recap kind of long-range planning within the reservation, we want to continue to address these stands being affected by the bark beetles. And so we have a long-range plan to keep doing thinning treatments, this time moving north of I-84 and working in what we call Cabbage Hill or the Esculpa Creek and Telephone Ridge compartments as well. So I wanted to get to some of the collaborative opportunities for managing. As you can see, we have a lot of work for us just within the reservation boundary, but there's certainly a lot of opportunity right now for doing work off reservation lands, but that target tribal priorities. The first thing is that the tribe meets annually with the U.S. Forest Service, the 3 forests in their ceded territory. This map on the left shows you the black outline is the ceded territory for the tribe, and then this dark green patch is the U.S. Forest Service network, and there's some other agency partners as well. And basically every year, our natural resource staff, as well as our board of trustees, meets with the Forest Service and talks about their scope of work, the work that they're doing, and the tribe reasserts their values and their interests in seeing how the forest is managed across the ceded territory. There's some new funding mechanisms that come online over the last decade or so. In 2004, the Tribal Forest Protection Act was enacted, which basically gives the tribe the ability to advocate for a specific forest treatment that's on Forest Service land, but that meets tribal priorities. One of the limitations is there's not really funding for this, and so somehow you have to be creative to get funding to do that. And our tribe has not yet enacted a Tribal Forest Protection Act project. Very similar is Good Neighbor Authority, which developed more for states to be able to do that kind of cross-boundary management with the Forest Service. But the authority to do those types of projects is been extended to tribes in 2018. But again, there's no direct allocation of funding every year for that. I spoke about the Reserve Treaty Rights Lands grant proposal, and that's a really great funding source for continuing to do work on and off the reservation. And one last thing I want to bring up is this collaborative forest landscape restoration program. And this is a lot of buzz around this right now. Basically, in last year, the Umatilla National Forest and Walla Walla National Forest, along with a whole host of signing partners, submitted an application for this grant program, and essentially gave these forests a huge pulse of money to be able to ramp up their ability to do active forest management across the landscape and across ownerships in order to provide more wildfire resilience to the landscape. If fully funded over 10 years, it would amount to between $30 and $40 million in new funding. And the proposal outlines an ambitious schedule of about 500,000 acres of active forest management, as well as another 400,000 acres that could be set up for natural wildfire. Really, the overarching goal of that program is to prepare the landscape for the beneficial use of naturally ignited wildfire and increasing capacity of the Forest Service and agency partners to implement that work. There's a lot of interest in tribal participation or partnership in this program. A big part of the push of this program is for collaborative land management to take place across agencies. And so I'm really excited for some opportunities for the tribe to be involved and to identify some areas of priority to be managed along the reservation boundary and across the ceded territory. So that's all I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give some minutes for Jeff Casey to speak about implementing prescribed fire.
Okay, go ahead and hit the next slide, Andy. I really appreciated Andy's presentation and given a really good background and explanation as how the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the CTUIR work together to meet natural resource management goals and objectives, particularly in forest management. As Andy mentioned, since 2009, the all natural resource programs for the tribe have been 638'd back to the tribe for their direct control, except for wildland fire management. And so that does present some unique challenges with working between the two agencies, but I also think it's some great opportunities working with the tribe and moving forward and using fire as a management tool on the land I think it has been and will continue to be very successful here. And I've worked several other places and with the tribes and BIA, and I'm really this is the best relationship that I've ever seen between the tribal natural resources and BIA fire. So that's really appreciated. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Andy. Okay, so as I said before, I'm the fire management officer, and this is an organization chart for the BIA Umatilla Agency Fire Management Program. As you can see, it's a combination of both BIA and tribal positions, and the organization is set up in such a way that if a tribal employee on an engine crew would like to move up the ladder and become the senior firefighter and then the assistant fire management officer and eventually the fire management officer, there is that career ladder for them. I this fire program has been fairly successful since I've been here, and I could not say that without the help and assistance of the tribe, not only just the natural resource folks, but definitely the board of trustees, human resources, IT. I mean, it's just the interaction and the cooperation that has gone on has just been exceptional, and I really appreciate that. Go ahead with the next slide, Andy. Okay, so the mission of the BIA, part of the actual mission statement is that the BIA is here to protect and improve trust resources for Native Americans, Native American tribes, and Alaskan natives. So with the guidance and mission from the BIA to protect and improve trust resources, there's really two different ways that we do that. First of all, when it comes to protecting trust resources, we have since last year have become responsible for all the fire suppression on the trust and latted lands within the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and that's approximately 190,000 acres. The organization chart that you just seen has expanded a lot since I've been here. When I showed up here 4 years ago, it was an FMO and an engine boss. And with BIA realizing that we had quite a bit more responsibility now to protect trust resources, and most importantly, life and property of tribal members on the reservation, they have been providing more money so we could increase our organization. When it comes to improving trust resources, I really like that as part of the BIA mission, because no other federal agency that I know of actually has that in their mission statement. They are going to improve resources. And so the Umatilla Agency Fire Management Program is responsible for, number one, fuels management to reduce the potential for catastrophic wildfire, because we are fire guys, but just as importantly, we're responsible for the application of fire as a management tool. And as I stated before, in conjunction and coordination with tribal forestry, wildlife, and range programs, we're really taking a step in that direction, and we're really doing some good stuff and having some good stuff planned. A new word that's really come into popularity over the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, has been traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge is simply that finally science is starting to realize that the folks that were here pre-European settlement were actually pretty darn good land managers, and that there wasn't just passive management. They actually were using fire as a management tool to meet some needs. And it just so happens that an article I wrote about that came out in the most recent edition of the Confederated Umatilla Journal. So if you guys would like to take a look at that, I think that explains that pretty good. But right now, our goal and our marching orders are to utilize tribal or traditional knowledge and modern fire science to be able to meet the goals and objectives as stated in the Tribal Resource Management Plan, and to be able to improve the trust resources out there. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Andy. Okay, there we go. The next slide that comes up, that's just, kind of for your guys' information, your folks' information. That's a list of projects that we are working for this year, for 2021, that we're working in conjunction with tribal Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife, and Forestry primarily to use fire as a management tool. Also, there's Andy was talking in his presentation about mastication. He was talking about using mechanical means such as chainsaws to do some thinning and some cutting, some piling. I mean, all those projects are listed on there, and this is really the way that I, as the BIA representative, go ahead and request money, some of which gets passed through to the tribe to implement these projects. Andy had also mentioned the RTRL funding and projects, and you can see that the ones that he mentioned are on there. I am happy that over the last 2 years, 3 years, we've been able to bring about $1.3 million to the tribe through the RTRL project for hazardous fuels reduction and forest health. And I think that really gives us the opportunity and ability to go out there, go forward, and do good things. Next slide, Andy. I kind of threw this one in here at last thought, folks, because I felt it was important that you saw some faces of the people that are out there with fire management, doing your fire suppression and working with tribal DNR to get your get some fire on the ground, do some prescribed burning. And when I look at this picture, I was pretty pleased because another mission of the BIA is to promote economic opportunities for tribal members. And I'm happy to say that in that picture, of the 12 people in that picture, 6 of those folks are tribal members. Or actually, 5 of those folks are tribal members, 6 of those folks are native. So, I really try to, open opportunities for young people that want to get on the seasonal fire crew, make some money, and actually be able to help their family and their partners or family and neighbors, on the reservation. Next one, Andy. And that's the final one. That's my contact information. If anybody would like to give me a call or juke me an email, I'd be more than happy to visit with you about anything we've talked about here today. I do have one final statement I want to make. Since this is a webinar on climate change, I will tell you that over the last 20 years, the fire season has increased by 45 days. In both the spring and the fall. So with climate change, we're looking at a 90-day longer fire season. We are looking at much greater catastrophic wildfires. As you all are aware, California burnt millions of acres last year. Western Oregon had a 500-year fire event, which I'm afraid is going to be repeated in a lot less time than 500 years if we don't do some management. And the fire, we no longer call it a fire season. We call it a fire year because of the additional days now, the 90 days that have been added to it by Mother Nature because of climate change. Fire suppression used to be what we did in the summer, and we did prescribed burning in the spring and in the fall and burn piles in the winter, and that's not the case anymore. We're ready to suppress fires any time of the year. And as a federal land management agency, a federal fire agency, we are also, we could be requested to go to California or to go to Arizona or Texas or anywhere in the United States to help out. So, there is no doubt that climate change is having a pretty profound effect on wildfire suppression and also on our ability to use fire as a management tool. It's narrowing our windows, and we're having to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more paying attention a little bit better on, things so that we can keep fire within the control line. Okay, that was the end of my babble. I really appreciate everybody's time. Colleen, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. And that's all I got.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was awesome. This is the presentation that when we were going through it, we were like, there is too much good information here to lose any of it. And so we're really thankful again to Wenix to moving her presentation to later this spring. And the information that you shared was amazing and incredible. I am going to ask one question that came really specifically through the chat. Fred Hill wanted to know, Andy, if the wood from those dead trees would be made available as firewood.
Certainly that's possible. When we do the commercial timber harvests, a lot of the wood we try to remove just because there's so much of it, and some of it has value as sawlog, some of it has value as pulpwood, and then some of it doesn't really have any value, and we retain some of it in the stand. It's something we're working on, is to make more of that wood available. From our last timber sales, we do have some piles available. We just need to figure out a way of getting them down to Mission to be distributed to tribal elders, but it's something we're working on. So certainly there's plenty of fuel wood up in the woods. The issue is how do we get it down and available for people?
Thank you. We're going to save the rest of our questions to the end of our Q&A period. That one is a really specific question that I thought Andy could take right now. So thank you so much, gentlemen. I am really excited now to move on to the cultural component. We've had Andy and Jeff talk with us about the logistics that go into all of this planning. And now Cheryl Shippentower, our restoration ecologist, is going to tell us why. Why is all of this work being done? Because of the really important first foods. So Cheryl, I would love if you could share your screen. All right, looks like it's going. And you are still muted.
Sorry, can you see my screen now?
We can see it in work mode and we can hear you. Perfect, it's in presentation mode. Go ahead, take it away.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for inviting me today to share some information on women's food and climate change. I'm Cheryl Shippentower, and I work for the Department of Natural Resources and Range, Ag, and Forestry. So a little bit about what I'll be talking about today is I'll give an overview of the women's food, briefly kind of so we can make that connection with climate change, talk about the impacts that climate change is having on women's food, and then move on to our women's foods projects and how we are, how these projects are assisting us in meeting the first food mission and addressing climate change. So first of all, Wenix kind of gave an introduction of, the importance of first foods and women's foods. And we gather a variety of food plants by tribal members, and we start, with our greens, really late winter, early spring, move into our root crops in the spring and summer, and then on to our berries, throughout the summer and into early fall. And there's a variety of foods that we gather that I won't be talking about today, but I just, wanted to, kind of display some of the foods that we won't be, but are still important to the tribe and are still gathered today. So a little bit about women's food. They're widespread. They have a widespread distribution, on the reservation and in our ceded areas, based on habitat, elevation, and soils. We have foods that we gather from riparian areas like wapatos, other materials like tule, and then our major area that we gather our root crops are, our scablands, and a lot of our species have really specific habitat. They're strongly associated with those habitats, based on soil and elevation. A lot of our crops prefer the less salt habitats, and a lot of our plants are For example, like lomatiums are biscuit roots. They're long-lived perennials. I mean, some of them live up to 100 years old, and they have these connections with pollinators and animals. They're forage and cover, and they thrive on disturbance, both natural like flooding and fires. And of course, from us as gatherers, that's, like was mentioned before, that we manage these landscapes. And so us gathering in those root crops, maintain those root crops. And that's very important that we protect and enhance these so that we can continue to gather from these areas. So I kind of wanted to go through and kind of talk briefly about some of the foods that we gather. And of course, I'm going to talk about these in an order that they presented themselves to us when they present themselves to the Indian people, and we gave the first food promise that if we take care of them, they'll take care of us. And so I'm going to, and this is continued. This is how the foods are served in Longhast, and this is still how we gather them in this order as well. And so I'll start with latit, and this is a widespread plant. It grows in well-drained, rocky, shallow soils. It's in low elevations up to moderate elevations. It's the first species to green up after the snow melt, which is important. I'll talk about later. And it's also an important species for early spring pollinators and other insects. Pihi is our next one. This is like gravelly to dry, heavy soils. It's also common on lithophile habitats, from sagebrush plains to mid elevations in the mountains. And the distribution of this one too is we have small populations on a reservation, but we also mainly gather off reservation and public and private lands. Luke is limited. It's not on the reservation. We mainly gather this on private and federal lands. And this is another one. It's another scabland, lithophile, shrub steppe habitats and deep soils. And this also grows like with the next species I'll talk about. It grows in these shrub steppe, and grassland areas. And this is this is abundant both on and off reservation. It likes, the dry, open, rocky, often associated with sagebrush. It grows in low elevations to much higher elevation as well. Sowick is the next one. And we're kind of transitioning away from those scablands to more meadow forested sites. It grows, in open woodland stands on the edges of forests, like you can see in the photo. It likes these wet meadows in the spring or grassy slopes. And this one's found, mid to, or low to mid elevation. Kamash. This one's found both on and off reservation. We have small populations that are on reservation. This site here is off. This whole meadow here is full of camas. It likes these open, moist areas, where they're dry by late spring, low to mid elevation as well. And I'm going to close up with a berry crop, Huckleberry Wawinu. It's found, in dry to moist coniferous forests. It likes open areas. It doesn't like the canopy too close. It's the moderate to mid elevation as well. And I kind of want to talk about kind of the issues. These are historical and current that have impacted our women's foods. And with climate change, it's going to amplify that. We've got plant community transition from invasive species. We've got, issues with access to gathering areas, and with the changes of climate change, that might impact that as well. So I want to talk about what kind of the observed and projected trends that we're seeing in Oregon. We're going to see, increases in temperature, changes in our precipitation and snowpack, with the, continued increase of global greenhouse gases. So we'll see, the greatest season temperature increases in the summer. We'll have greater precipitation, but it'll be more as rain than snow. And then our snowpack will vary geographically throughout the state. So I kind of want to move next into talking about how climate change is impacting women's foods. It impacts it at, physiological level as well as plant community. And this impacts the diversity and distributions of our food. So first, what we can see right now today is we're already starting to see, changes in the timeline of flowering and the phenology of our plants. We're seeing this shift of species distribution, moving poleward or upward in elevation. So if we see this shifting in flowering, we'll see loss of reproduction capacity of our women's foods due to increased frost damaging, or we'll see uncoupling with the plant pollen interactions. And then with the distribution, it'll vary greatly by species. And then this will alter the availability and access for tribal people in the future. So I'll kind of start out with kind of the physiology, start over. So we'll talk about kind of the plant responses to the rising CO2 levels. We'll see increased growth and biomass, so carbon sinks, which is a good thing, but it'll get to the point, where plants will start becoming a source instead of a sink. But I wanted to talk about, CO2, certain plants will take, that'll be advantageous for them. So for example, like invasive annual grasses, they'll have the advantage and then they'll cause a shift in habitat. So you'll see plant communities shift from, perennial forbs and grasses to annual invasive habitats. And then that just creates, other issues with that, fire. Next is kind of want to talk about the response to temperature. You'll see faster growths with this. So we have dormancy issues, unpredictable weather. So you'll have issues where you have these early blooms, and then they'll be damaged by frost, and so you'll have low or no berry production. Or you'll have unpredictable weather events where like we had a few years ago, we had a really early frost, and it damaged a lot of chokecherries. In the following year, we had very little chokecherry production that following year. Another one, kind of responses to water, and this is what we're going to see in the Blue Mountains. What they're kind of predicting is that our grassland and like sagebrush communities, like rigid sagebrush was an important community that supports our first foods, will become more drought. They'll be converted to more drought species. So, what this causes is stress to the flower. It'll cause it to flower sooner, and then you'll have either a rapid seed set, or the more of the allocation will go to the root growth. And this is what you'll see, how it will impact our women's foods is that we collect some of these at vegetative stages before they flower. And so we will potentially miss those windows. And I've seen that with bitterroot on some years when we've got really high temperatures in early spring, and it just pushes them, they don't flower, and that impacts the reproductivity of those plants. And they just go right past the flowering. And next is unpredictable weather. We depend on the predictable weather to set our gathering times, our feasts. And so what the ladies have been sharing with me is that this is a quote from at the beginning of harvest time, we worry about snow and rain when gathering, and now we don't know what to expect, either unusual warm temperatures when we're gathering celery, which is late winter, or really wet conditions in the spring when we're gathering our root crops, and this impacts the quality of those root crops and how we process those as well. Shorter winters and less snow. Snow insulates and protects our plants in in harsh conditions in the winter from freezing temperatures and winds that we're experiencing right now. So it may be hard to see in this picture, but what I've seen I've noticed on huckleberries is these dead stems, and that's from those stems not being protected from cold temperatures and winds. We're seeing the change in gathering season. They're predicting these longer growing seasons, but what the ladies are seeing out there is that they have they have a shorter window to get out there and gather. I think it's starting sooner and ending quicker. And then I wanted to move on kind of the plant community interactions. Like I mentioned before, invasive species, their invasiveness is going to increase with more suitable conditions, the increase in CO2, the severity of disturbance, so like fire, and these are all natural. We have our plant communities, our ecosystems aren't static. There's constant disturbance, there's constant change, but it's the severity and frequency of that's going to impact our plant communities, their resilience and but the biodiversity is just native plant communities can't keep up with that constant disturbance. And then there's migration barriers. And some of our plants, like our biscuit roots, our limatiums, they're not efficient seed dispersers. So, how will barriers and will they, there'll be barriers on the landscape, and will they be able to adjust fast enough with climate change? Another is the plant pollen interactions. These phenological changes could lead to decoupling, so you could have pollinators that respond to air temperature, then plants don't respond until snow melts. So you have this decoupling where one comes out first, and then it's really important. So we have like our celery that flowers right after snow melt. It's really important for pollinators, bees and butterflies. And then it's also important for that food to be pollinated. So we need to have that company. And so, but then we may have, they may respond together, or we just don't know. It's a lot of unknowns. So I kind of wanted to share some modeling work that was done on the roots and huckleberries. The first one I'll talk about is what's done by GIS. There was a climate data story map created, and this is available on the website if you guys are interested in looking at it. So the available climate change was put together to show the different impacts to all our, not just plants, but to water quality, snow melt, precipitation, fisheries. But what I'm going to talk about is the root ones first. And then what this does for us is kind of, this information kind of enhances our decision-making abilities, to first foods. So here's a map that shows the distribution of our root crops within our seeded area, within the Blue Mountains. And this next one shows the potential changes to vegetation by mid-century. And this is at the high emission in the Blue Mountains. So the darker areas signify the change of plant communities. So you can kind of see the overlap with our foods. And so I'll go to the next one, where it's the end of the century, where you see a huge change. The darker areas show the change in vegetation. And then also I wanted to share this huckleberry. This is there was a new paper out on looking at the shifts in habitat suitability and phenology for huckleberry to climate change. So this map right here shows you the purple is the current suitable habitat, and then these lighter purples right here shows the habitat gains, and then the pink is the in 2085. So what's that showing is, what they're predicting is that the habitat's gonna move north. So so a lot of this information that they used for this was, observations from citizen scientists, long-term data from federal agencies, and then climate data to help them kind of identify climate variables that best predicted, the habitat and the timing of flowering and fruit ripening of huckleberry. So what this is showing by the end of the 21st century, with these high and mid emission scenarios, that the range of black huckleberry is going to contract at lower altitudes, and more southern locations in the future, and then you'll have more suitability, may increase at higher altitudes and northern latitudes. And that's what this map is showing, is that we're going to have more suitable habitat in the northern areas and higher elevations. And this is another one kind of showing the percentage of suitable habitat. And I kind of wanted to focus in on where we are. And you can see that the percentage of change is, our area right here is kind of in this negative. So this shows us losing up to 40% in some areas suitable habitat for huckleberry. And then finally showing the predicted change in flowering of huckleberry. So what they're, from this work that their modeling work, is showing that the fruiting was predicted to advance slightly more in flowering in the future. So for both fruiting and flowering predictions, there would be a great advantage or advance. And so you can see by days, it'd be up to 55 days that you'll see increased flowering than present flowering. And so with this information, gathering areas for women's food increases in importance if and when food distribution changes. So for us to continue access and gathering these women's foods in the future for future generations, I'm going to talk about what we're doing, share some projects, and how we will address climate change. In 2006, we started a partnership with the Forest Service and BLM, doing a first food modeling using ArcGIS to develop these land-based, landscape-level models that predict or identify habitats that support root plants in these, Forest Service and BLM lands. And the goal of this, this is to get a better understanding of the distribution of our first foods, our women's foods in the seeded areas. Have that informed knowledge of where they're at, so that we can kind of determine the condition of these root species, and then develop a coordinated management with these federal agencies. So this is the result for BLM. It shows the different colors show different root crops. So lomatiums, bitterroot, sawick. And then with the Forest Service, we initially started with the Umatilla National Forest forest-wide. And then we kind of narrowed our focus to the Hepburn Ranger District, looking at habitat for bitterroot, couch, celery, and camas. As you kind of see this, so there's potentially almost 40,000 acres of habitat available for those four species. And then from this project, so this is just kind of presence, absence, where this is suitable habitat. So what we did was we developed a first food long-term monitoring to monitor plant communities. So rigid sagebrush habitat is associated with, with our food plants, couch, bitterroot, and camas. And so we began that to kind of develop a baseline of what kind of condition are these communities in, and to monitor that through time. So we looked at the cover and density and recruitment, how our first foods are reproducing in those communities, and looking at the cover and density of that sagebrush. Because what they're predicting is the shrinking of these shrub communities. And so we want to kind of monitor that and see, how that impacts our first foods. And then, of course, we are looking at annual invasive grasses a while and see how those are impacting the community, if they're increasing or decreasing in those communities and how they're impacting them. And so I want to move on to another project that we have is the First Food Pollinator Project. So what we want to identify the important native pollinators for celery, cow's, camas, and huckleberry. So we wanted to know, do these first foods require pollinators for reproduction, and what are those pollinators? So we've got 3 years of data looking at this. We have all 3 years we looked at huckleberry. The first year we did huckleberry and cow's. The second year we did huckleberry and celery. And then the third year we did camas and huckleberry and cow's. Here's some of the results. So for celery, we had their ground nesting bees. So we're all miner bees, but they're all different species. So celery had the white-haired miner bee, or Housh had the western miner bee, and camas the blue and black miner bee. And what was interesting is we had overlap of camas and huckleberry of the same 2 species of bumblebee. And so it's really important that we have this understanding so that we can protect these resources, make sure that we provide habitat protection for these plant communities and have flora diversity, and be cautious with our herbicide application in these areas so we can protect these so that they can have this continued pollinator and first food connection. So the next project I want to talk about is our Huckleberry Monitoring Project. We want to expand our understanding of habitat requirements for huckleberry, so we can make these informed management decisions. There's not a lot of information out there on our women's foods, and so what we're going to do is establish these weather stations. We've got 2 that will be on reservation and 1 on Forest Service, and we'll be looking at these different parameters and how that affects the habitat, and also the phenology, so we'll manage that or monitor that over time. So with all those parameters we're measuring, we'll have cameras set up to monitor the phenology. And so having that other information will help us to, identify what impacts, the budding, the flowering, and the berry productions. They vary from year to year in the Blue Mountains. We have really good years and we have not so good years. So this will be really good information to inform on huckleberries. And then finally, I want to close with what we're doing on the ground for restoration. So like Andy had mentioned and what's mentioned in the previous is we've got these guiding documents, the Upland Vision and the River Vision, that will help us. It kind of describes the desired, ecological processing for first foods and proposes management strategies that we can incorporate the community's values and needs. But what's important is that with these documents and others, and we've got our forest management that Andy had talked about. We're now developing a new range management. We've created invasive weed management, and so what we're hoping is that we'll create these climate resistant, resilient plant communities, and then as well as response strategies to climate change. And I didn't want to end. I want to end kind of on a positive note. There's always been environmental change, and the tribes have been really resilient. There's always been an expectation of variation, recognizing that there's a range in variation of weather and productivity of resources. But I think that it's important that that we manage these landscapes for first foods, so that we can continue this way of life. And we have been managing these landscapes for thousands of years. and we continue to gather the same foods. And then the importance of traditional phenological knowledge, or just traditional knowledge. Tribal people have the knowledge of plants, first foods, to determine, the timing and gathering of foods. We determine when our first foods feasts are, collection, and this is all based on predictable weather patterns. And I think that as tribal people, that we can help inform decisions on climate change, because we're so connected to the landscape and we can see all the changes that are going on throughout the landscape when we're gathering, whether we're fishing, whether we're digging roots, whether we're out there picking berries or medicine. We just have this strong connection with the land. And so I wanted in closing to acknowledge the first food gatherers who've shared their information with me. Stacy Schumacher, who did all the GIS, the mapping and modeling work for women's foods. Sarah Gardner, who did our pollinator work, and of course our partners, the Forest Service and BLM. And that's it. Thank you. And we can move on to the next presenter, and I appreciate having an opportunity to share these projects with you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was wonderful information. And I know that there is a lot facing our women's foods right now, especially with climate change, but you're right. These lands and the people who have managed them are resilient, and we are looking forward to being able to perpetuate this work into the future with some of those research projects that you're doing. I am so excited to have our last speakers up, last only in order, not in importance, because the work that they're doing is the future. And so I'm really excited to offer Bobby and Brosnan, if you're able to share your screen right now and unmute yourself. That would be wonderful. And again, to save bandwidth for our presenters, I would love to have everyone turn their cameras off until our discussion periods, when we can turn them back on and connect with each other face to face. So Bobby and Brosnan, would you let me know that you are in a good place, that you can hear me? Excellent. It looks really good. I think you might still be muted though.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
So we see it in presenter view right now, or in work view right now. Perfect.
Okay. Hi, my name is Brosnan Spencer.
I'm Bobby Fossick.
And Meadow. And we are Naknuiflama Tichumna, caretakers of the land.
We are a grassroots, family-led effort in the process of becoming a nonprofit organization. We are serving to steward and strengthen the symbiotic lifeways, habitats, and food systems of the Blue Mountains through seasonal round immersion camps and ecosystem restoration. And here's a picture of camas field at Ladd Marsh, where we gather camas and gather camas seed as well for a restoration project.
And so we just wanted to kind of talk about some of our bigger projects we're working on. Again, we're just a family-led grassroots effort, but we're just an extension of our ancient way of life, and a big part of what's on our heart has always been to spread ourselves out throughout our homelands even more, and to just work together to perpetuate these efforts and restore our presence and the presence of our plants back in some places like the Grand Ronde Valley. Particularly, it's a very important place to us. And so one of our major projects is native prairie and riparian restoration in Cove, Oregon. And here you can see this is a photo I took of my horses grazing in a portable electric fence I move around, looking over the Grand Ronde Valley, looking northwest towards Mount Emily. This is on the site here. And so through a series of synchronistic events, we found ourselves working in partnership with the Ascension School Camp and Conference Center in the Episcopal Diocese of Eastern Oregon. It's a church to restore 80 acres of their land holdings here in Cove, which have been heavily farmed for the last century. And for those that don't know, Cove is a big crossover area between all neighboring tribes. Utilize this area for lots of different gathering purposes. And this is a part of, they set the intention as an organization to repudiate the doctrine of discovery and the negative effects it's had on indigenous people, people of color, and ecosystems across the globe through their sort of supremacy tactics and erasure tactics. And they're also offering staff and resources in the meantime to help us raise funds and incubate our own nonprofit. And this is a picture of fall of 2019. We had a small group come out, and Colleen was there, and we planted some camas in this little area here. This is just a small portion of the project, but it was kind of an initiation planting to just let people know and start bringing people together. And this is another one of our hopes, is to kind of have opportunities to bridge gaps and give people the opportunity to help bring back some of these foods where they've been completely removed. So we're working on restoring the riparian habitat along the traditionally fish-rearing tributaries of Catherine Creek that flow through the property. In our native place names atlas, it refers to Cove as Walla Walla, many springs and streams place, and they were all anadromous fish and resident fish rearing habitat before they were all channelized and ditched. And so we're also working to restore a portion of the traditional prairie diversity and first foods abundance of the Grand Ronde Valley here on this site. And it also includes a nature trail and outdoor classroom for outdoor school type programming and educational experiences for people to learn, and to also just have a place for the community to come walk and stretch their legs. And so in the picture here, we got some of our bunch grasses coming up and some wapato and the camas bulbs that we planted during that event. So native plants, some of the plants that we're focused on restoring to the site. This picture is at PlantWorks Native Plant Nursery in Cove. We decided to work with them because they're like a mile away from the site that we're restoring. So it just is really efficient to be able to store our plants there that they grew and to just go grab what we need when we need it. And they're been really great and supportive. So it makes it really efficient to work with them. So some of the plants we're focused on restoring, to name a few, are native willows, coyote willow, Mackenzie, peach leaf, water birch, thin leaf alder, black cottonwood, golden currants particularly, which currants are one that, I've heard used to be just everywhere. And then in the early 1900s, the Forest Service had a ribes genus eradication effort, and they intentionally wiped out the majority of the currant population and the gooseberry population in an effort to theoretically protect the timber industry from disease. Serviceberry is an important one that we're restoring a lot of. Chokecherry, elderberry, woods rose, Nootka rose, black hawthorn, mock orange, and some of the more prairie dynamic type plants we're restoring are native bunch grasses, such as Idaho fescue, blue bunch wheatgrass, tufted hairgrass, big bluegrass, Great Basin wild rye. And what's neat is I took the Pollinator mini conference with Sarah Gardner, who's doing those studies that Cheryl was talking about. And these native bunch grasses are crucial habitat for those ground mining bees. And so we got to get these bunch grasses restored. If we don't get these bunch grasses restored, we'll be shooting ourselves in the foot. And also those sagebrushes. And another big one, camas. This Grand Ronde Valley was known for its, like an ocean of camas here. People came from all over to gather and bake camas. Tule reeds, various lomatiums, arrowleaf and hoary balsam root, native onions, and many other wildflowers, all of which are important for shading, filtering, retaining water, preventing erosion, sequestering carbon, providing habitat and feed for wildlife, pollinators, and all of which are traditional foods, medicines, and materials. Tongue twister. So here's some photos I just wanted to share. This is us last year out planting a bunch of willows, top left, and moving to the right. Here's fall of 2019 when we were doing our initial planting of native bunch grasses. The fields were planted with wheat for nearly 100 years, and every once in a while they do alfalfa. And so we used a no-till drill to get the grass seed planted. And so we hire out, local help and their equipment. And here's a nice sunset picture after we got done installing a bunch of trees and shrubs and exclosures on the site here, looking over towards what do they call this? Feist Point, the Tule Lake. This used to be called here. Now it's all drained. Hot Lake and Lad Marsh over this way. And here's one of our helpers removing a culvert, one of our many efforts to start to bring back the function of these streams flowing that are braiding through this property. Here's another picture. The horses get put to work too. They're clearing out some non-native grasses here to make way for getting some of the native diversity put back in there. And here's a picture of some golden currants that we planted and that took off successfully. And one thing that is more idea form and small scale experiment, but I think is a good conversation to bring to the table, is assisted migration of certain native plants, not of every plant in the world, but and so like is commonly said, as habitat niches shift northerly and up in elevation, the availability of some of our foods may become scarce due to climate change. And as some of those niches move north, assisted migration of certain native plants, fire adapted plants, may be an adaptive way to create more diversity in food sources while sinking carbon and shading streams and preventing erosion. And so some of the plants that we're doing small scale experiments with are the native oaks, very fire adapted species of plants that produce super nutritious source of carbohydrates and fats, a staple food for many people. The native hazelnuts, the western Corylus cornuta beaked hazelnut right here, sugar pines and other fire adapted native pines that also produce these delicious pine nuts that are a great source of fatty acids and protein. And Wapato. Wapato particularly is one that we got established here. And it has been found naturally occurring locally, but with the extreme manipulation of the wetlands and the stream channels where she lives, much of the population has been lost. And, a lot of people, if they see it growing, anything like this that's not their crop, they're going to burn it, spray it, drain that wetland. So it's like, who knows how much diversity was once here, but.
One of our next projects that we're focusing on is the land-based seasonal round immersion camps. Our intention is to create more opportunities for our Native community to slow down and deepen the connection to our homelands and revitalize traditional ecological knowledge throughout each season. Here's a picture of one of our camps on Mount Emily. And here's some of our spring foods. So during these camps, we focus on how to harvest, process, cook, and preserve these foods for the year so that we can eat them throughout the year. And we also do a lot of giveaways and help out with different ceremonies. The top left, we have Latit Latit, and then Piache, Luksh, Chaush, Sikni, and Mamin. Spring abundance. We are working on preserving the knowledge of our many spring foods and their various uses, such as teas, salads, syrups, stews, supalil, and medicines. Here on the top left, we have meadow with a glacier lily. Bottom corner, we have puthla. And then in the center, we have stone crop. Bottom right, tube grass, and top right, cat's ears. So we're always trying to learn our foods and the different varieties and diversity, and different ways how to cook them and get them on our plate and in our bellies. Then we go into our summer foods and our summer camps. Here we have Hamash, Sawitk, Anipash, and Nunas. I recently just learned how to bake Hamash and just within the last few years, and it's my favorite one now. I love all of them, but now it's just my favorite one. Camp life. So some of the duties around camp are watering and moving the horses and the electric fence daily. We don't always have our horses with us for camp, but any opportunities that we can bring them, we take those opportunities. Some other duties are cooking, gathering and filtering water, keeping camp clean, and clearing the deadfall, fuel buildup, and ladder fuels for firewood, gathering the available native plant seed on site to plant in disturbed areas around camp as well. We also take ample time for inner reflection, nature connection, and day hikes. Then we have our Ladd Marsh Hot Lake Camp. This is an annual camp focused on gathering tule for mat weaving opportunities. We also gather our camas seed there for a restoration project, and the currant berries are very abundant there. Top left corner, we have some camas seed that we gathered there, and then the currants. Meadow weaving cattails, bottom left corner, and Meadow and her dad harvesting tule for tule mats. We like to get our tule mats every year and dry our foods on them. So mainly just like our roots and berries, we dry on our tule mats. I also, hold space for people if they want to learn how to gather and weave tule mats. This camp is also an opportunity to connect with the highly significant cultural site and soak in the healing mineral waters that are there. Ladd Marsh has an abundance of weaving materials and foods like tule, sedge, cattail, Great Basin wild rye, the switched camas, and willow. We look forward to going there every year, and we always receive a warm welcome when gathering. And it brings us into our berry camps. Again, with the berries, we also focus on how to harvest, process, cook, and preserve the berries for the year. Here we have matup, that's the elderberry, chicha, the serviceberry, tamish, the chokecherry, and chun, the currants, and wunu, the huckleberry. And I also, when I have the opportunity and it feels safe to do so, I offer classes on how to make different medicines and syrups, medicinal syrups, things like that. Processing foods. So some of the ways we like to process our foods is to dehydrate them, can them, and freeze them. So at the bottom left, we have some chokecherries that were crushed and dried, sun-dried, and we add that into our soups, and we add that into our breakfasts like oatmeal or root porridge. And in the center, we have some berries drying on the screen. The top right corner, we have Suplil, where there's acorn flower in there, sawitk, cowsh, currants, chicha, and wunu. And then the bottom right is the berries being dried and put away for the year in different jars. And then when we're ready, we just hydrate them and eat them. Here's some food. The top left is berry roots, nuts, porridge. This is one of our staple foods. And as you can see, there's like a scoopful of bear fat right there. Where we live here, there's a lot of hunters that hunt bear. And so sometimes we'll ask for the fat so we can render it and add it to our meals. And then, so that's the top left. And then the top right is that being prepared. And bottom left is acorn bread. And in the center is my stew I like to make. Again, one of our staple foods. It has elk and roots and berries and corn and dried herbs. The bottom left is some wapato that we gathered on the Yakima River. So with that, we dried it, we canned it in deer broth, and we ate it fresh. Okay.
Okay, so I grew up dividing my time between CTUIR and the Grand Ronde Valley, and hearing a lot of stories growing up about how abundant the Hamash once was throughout this valley. It was always close to my heart to want to see it come back, and then to eventually learn how to process it. And this became a big community effort through the language program and through cultural resources the last few years. So I was able to partake. We were all able to partake and learn. And so as we're restoring it here, we also want to have an annual bake here in Cove. So as the summer camps are coming to an end, we'll begin our annual camas bake, Chmash Tamaicht. This camp is intended to be a multi-generational tribal event centered around community building, traditional crafts and skills such as learning the art of camas baking, weaving tule mats and wupis, suplil making, bone tools, and really the list goes on. We can have as much sharing and workshops and things as we can bring together. And with COVID, it's been hard to do much this last year, but we've been trying to do things as a small group. So these are pictures from last year's Tamaich, the rocks first getting heated up, and the ilpus, the firewood that I was told traditionally used would be alder. And one of the things here in Cove is there's wild plum and cherry thickets that have gone, from the settlers planted orchards, they've gone wild and they're just thick. And so every year I try to thin a little bit of them out and prune them up. And so we just use that plum wood for the Tamaich. Here's the rocks just about hot, and eventually getting the layers in, and this is when we're pulling it out, and that's the finished product. So along with restoring the camas to the site, we're also made an agreement to have the entire campus reserved for 1 week every year, and from now until forever, to have this bake. So we'd like to make this a community event where we can reconnect with this valley. We go and gather all the materials from the valley, like the switch, the ryegrass we got from Marsh. Yeah, the switch here, and then the rocks, the pushwa. We found some andesite nearby, and where we can go get rocks. The shukwa, the mint. This is just right up the road from Cove, near Moss Springs Guard Station. This mint really likes to move into grazed areas, and so right near their horse holding facility, it just filled right in. So it's a nice place to gather it. Here's some suplil that was made during camp. Everyone had their own little station and got to make their own and sun dry it. And And then here's a picture of all the ladies canning it up after we're done, and Meadow documenting everything. And then that brings us to one of our, we'd like to work on learning and retaining and revitalizing as much skills as we can. And so we've been putting a lot of effort into hide tanning, turning particularly deer hides. We've been focusing on turning deer hides into smoked brain tan buckskin using the wet scrape method. And so during the winter time, particularly want to use that time to learn language. It's been really great having Zoom this year, learning language with Fred and Damien and everybody. And then also to be working a lot on these crafts. So we've been started last year. Well, we've been doing it ourselves as a family. Then last year we opened it up and had a small camp in our front yard where we had a couple tribal members come out and tan hides for a few days. And then we were able to, I applied for a grant and was able to receive it this year. And so we're able to purchase a bunch of tools and supplies and have a food provided. And again, with limitations with COVID, we're not able to do a whole lot, but we're still going to work together as a small group and take some pretty serious guidelines to just make sure we can, scrape some hides and tan some hides.
Yeah, all lodging is provided and everyone has their own areas to make it COVID safe. Same with meals. And we don't charge for this camp. We don't charge for any of the camps at all, but we just want to teach people how to do it if you want to learn. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the intention. I got a lot of people asking about what, whatever the case may be of buying hides and none of this we really want to do to try to make any money or anything. We just want to revitalize and perpetuate this knowledge and learn as much as we can and bring together students and teachers. We're young. We don't know. There's a lot we don't know, but we have the motivation, the determination, and starting to build the resources to expand our efforts out into the Grand Ronde Valley and surrounding mountains. And we didn't list it, but some of these crafts, Brosnan's been really devoted to learning cedar root weaving and a lot of different crafts. And so we hope to just keep expanding on that and eventually have a sort of a language and craft winter camp, and just put a lot of effort into that. So with all that being said, some of the changes, challenges, and channelizations that we're dealing with, and I decided to just put in channelizations because with every food, everything we're dealing with, it always comes back to water. And from the tops of the mountains all the way to the ocean, our water is treated like it's just a dead thing to be used however, and that I think is one of our biggest troubles there. So here in the Grand Ronde Valley is an extreme case of channelization and draining throughout the Grand Ronde Valley, river drainage, and then the subsequent loss of suitable habitat for many first foods, and loss of cold, clean water sources in the mountains due to overgrazing and human impact. There's a lot of springs that are gone. There's a lot of water sources that are, you can't even filter through it. We even have pretty high-tech water filters that can't even handle some of our water sources. And then what's that, also the meadows surrounding those water sources drying up sooner, and what's that going to cause? And then, large amounts of sheep grazing on some of our gathering areas. This is about maybe 1/10 of this flock of sheep that came to this pond while we were gathering some hamash nearby, and they just kept coming and coming, and none of the camas hardly had any seed heads on top anymore, so it's really lessening the reproduction opportunities and also reducing the amount of forage for our wildlife. So how do we manage some of those interactions and bring some balance? And we're hoping that we can see more efforts to protect some of these water sources, and that maybe we can collaborate to include that into some of our summer camps and spring camps. We're seeing a lot of disease patches of berries. This is a picture of serviceberry at the Mount Emily Recreation Area. Nearly every serviceberry bush was covered in this this growth, or this, I think it might be a egg sac of some sort, but they were just covering the whole thing, and a lot of them were just eaten down to nothing. The huckleberries, or a lot of them are spotted, and just as Cheryl was saying, some of the lower reach populations aren't doing very good at all. If they produce any berries at all, they're not doing very good, and so we're having to wait a little bit longer and move a little bit higher. Yeah, and just the mistreatment of water is a huge thing. Lack of fire, a lot of overgrown and dying forest. That's why we're just hoping to make our camps kind of a grassroots effort to help with some of those things. The camps we're at, usually we leave them more fire resilient and better than we found them, and try to make that life way of land management how we live and move through the world. So and the extreme weather fluctuations, just as Cheryl was saying, causing sporadic growth and dormancy patterns, often creating a shorter gathering season where things come on a lot quicker and go back underground a lot sooner. Sometimes they don't make any seed, or
The leaves are burned.
the leaves kind of seem burnt because there'll be a real warm event happen real early, and then another cold snap, kind of like spring and then winter, and spring and then winter again, and kind of joke around, say, oh, we're in our second winter or third winter, so that that's going to be something to that we're going to have to deal with. And that being said, here's another picture of the sun setting over one of our camas camps near us. This is near Spring Mountain. Thank you all for giving us the opportunity to share what we're doing, and thank you all for everything you do. It's a community effort. Take a lot of people taking a lot of little steps and big steps together to move forward. So we really appreciate you all, and thank you for the opportunity. Kwatla Shamatash, I'ow.
I'ow.
Thank you guys so much. We are so honored by the knowledge that you carry with you, that you continue to perpetuate, and that you shared with us today. Is there a way that people can get in touch with you if they're interested in your camps?
You're unmuted.
Yeah, I'll include some contact information in the conversation bar. I should have put it on our slideshow. So.
It's okay. We send out emails after this, so we'll make sure to get people in touch with you, because I think there's going to be a lot of people interested in following up with you on that after this wonderful presentation that you guys shared. I was really honored to get to be out there that day that you were doing the camas and wapato planting, and that was a really great day, and I was so impressed with everything that you guys have going on. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you too.
Yeah. So this is our opportunity now that if you're interested, we have time for a discussion period. And so I know I've been kind of aggressive about telling people to turn their cameras off, but now is our opportunity to have our cameras on and talk with each other in a more natural way that we're able to do during this pandemic time. And so I wanted to start off this with some of the questions that we've had in the chat box. Andy, I know that you answered Gail's question in the chat, but I would love if you would talk a little bit about, Gail Redberg asked about treatments of those containment lines. And so you answered her, but I was wondering if you could talk with us a little bit about it.
Sure. So she put in the chat a question. I think she noticed in one of our photos, we had a piece of machinery putting in a containment line. And so obviously those lines help us to do prescribed fire because you basically remove all vegetative material, get down to mineral soil, and then you can spread fire and know that the fire is not going to go back over that line. And so that's a way for us to contain that fire when we're doing prescribed fire. Depending on how you do it, you can do it. A lot of folks use it with fire line tools like a Pulaski or a shovel, or you can do it with an excavator or like a shovel implement on it. And then we've been pioneering using that skid steer with the mulching head. So depending on what method we use, has a different effect on how deep in the soil we go. The image that I showed was of the skid steer, and we've actually found that with that mulching head, it only goes about an inch or two down into the soil. And so all those roots are still intact. And so it's really a great tool if we're going to know we're going to be burning that season. But by the next year, it's completely coming back with shrubs and forbs. And so we don't tend to reseed those. But if we have something with a little bit more impact on the ground level, like if we're doing a line with we don't really use a dozer, but maybe an excavator with a shovel head on it, then we will have to reseed that.
Perfect. Thanks for answering that. We also had a couple comments. Don Motanic wanted to remind us that 638s are a great opportunity for tribes to be able to exercise their land management. And I do believe that our RAF program is a 638 operated program, but correct me if I'm wrong. Fred Hill wanted to say, great presentation, Bobby and Brosnan. I think that we all really feel that. And Andrea actually wanted to hear a little bit from Meadow, if possible. I don't know if Meadow has some thoughts on everything that she's been working on with us or with you guys.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Meadow. Do you have any thoughts on all of the wonderful things that you get to do? We've seen so many cute pictures of you, and you look like you're having a great time.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. It's definitely hard trying to do stuff because trying to do really anything that isn't sitting down or something like that. Getting up is a challenge, but once you get up and do it, it's like I don't want to go home. So even if I woke up on the other side of the bed, I'm just like I end up enjoying it once we're about to leave.
That is so great. I know that I kind of feel the same way, that it's hard to get into something, but then you find out that you're having a great time. And so that is very, very true. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
So now is our opportunity to just have an open discussion. If you want to provide some feedback or ask a question yourself, you are welcome to. We have that raise hand function that is somewhere on your browser that you can hit to let us know that you'd like to say something, and we'll hold space for you. Or if you just want to open up your mic and speak, this is an opportunity to do so. And so if your mic is open, I will call on you. And I might actually just have, if the presenters had anything that they wanted to say, I'd love to have Wenix share a little bit.
Thank you, Colleen. I really enjoyed this part of the presentation. I feel that we don't always get to hear our representation from just about what's going on in the forest, the work that Cheryl does, and I was actually really excited about some of the things Cheryl was doing. And Bobby and Brosnan did an amazing presentation. I truly, it's been a long time since I've been really excited about a presentation, and just the information that she were giving, and the way you guys did a really beautiful job. And by the work that we do to educate and to go out there and to do the work with our tribal community, and there's a lot of knowledge that none of us know, and we have to go out to find that knowledge to bring back to educate. And just because we have lost knowledge related to a food, it's still there and we still have connection. And because we are tied to this food and we have reciprocal responsibility, is our ability to be able to go out and relearn her or relearn our brothers and sisters, and to bring that back any way that we can, as long as we do that in a good heart and to do that work. Meadow is a shining example, the reason why we do the work we do. And the amount of knowledge that she knows because the way that they're living. And I really am excited to see what we do leading forward as the department and cultural resources, and working to do our first foods excursions and be able to get people back out to restore the knowledge that has been either misplaced or let go because we are in forced situations and not being able to be on the land all the time, and to restore those connections, and also be able to celebrate the work that our department has done in the restoration of that and bringing that back and getting us back out there to place. And I'm really thankful that I've been able to have the chance to get to work with the people that I do. And thank you so much for that presentation. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and be able to partner in some of those camps and bringing excursions out to meet up as a group. And we meet up with them quite a bit, and I really enjoyed this session.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that you and the ladies over at Yellow Hawk were really interested in doing a Stop Little class. And after seeing the photos, those photos are making me hungry, actually. And so I think I mean, it's been really exciting to see the partnership that's grown and really the sharing of knowledge.
Yes, and by saying that, I'm hoping that we can bring them as our instructors to do that class, and we're getting ready to reach out to them regarding that. So we got the roots, and we want to let go, and to be able to do a practice that comes back to that, and then just to be able to, even the webinar, to record that session for us to be able to access them. The one thing about the pandemic, it has slung us forward in an area that we haven't been in before, and it's forcing us to really grasp a hold of technology. And in the long run, it's going to benefit us so much more, because even our elders are forced to have to record, to have to be heard, and to have to stretch out beyond where we have those different beliefs. This, I think, breaks that barrier. And I think from here out, we're going to see some pretty amazing things. We're hoping to do some outdoor sessions where we're doing some recording and introductions to those foods in short clip videos that we have for some of our education. So I'm really excited where we're going forward towards that.
Absolutely. Dawn, you are unmuted, and so I am going to call on you if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit.
Sure. What would you like to know?
Well, Don, I think we're still a little confused about your comments about the 638 in terms of working on the U.S. Forest Service. Maybe you could just really briefly talk about that.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Well, 2018, the Farm Bill authorized 638 with the Forest Service. 638, well, when it was passed, 98, 638 back 1975, it was with authorized tribes and Department of Interior and Indian Health Service, where tribes could contract with those agencies and departments, but not agriculture. But with the new law, it's the first time that tribes have been able to contract with Forest Service. So that's a new opportunity, and it just started, and there's new workshops initiated to help tribes contract with the Forest Service directly. You know, in the past with contracts, stewardship contracts, it's like the tribes are treated almost like a regular contractor. The finance it's awkward, whereas just like with 638 with the BIA, you're contracting a function that the money goes directly from the Forest Service to the tribe, or it's easier. For the tribe it is. The Forest Service is starting to learn how to do that, but I believe the Tulalip tribe is one of the first tribes in the Northwest to contract. So that's one of the things that it's good once you start getting one tribe to start contracting. Other tribes could take You know, the tribe could contract the whole Umatilla National Forest. That's a dream. There's a lot of congressional people, in testimony in Congress. There's several congressional people that actually would like the tribes to contract the whole Forest Service. So, and I think this tribe could do it.
Thank you for sharing that information. And I know you also mentioned the fact that the recent Farm Bill opened up opportunities for contracting with the USDA also. And so this is something that our Department of Child and Family Services has been interested in pursuing, is that 638 to take over that food assistance program. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about that mechanism. I know that Erin Warden had a question actually even before this webinar started, and it's a question for Cheryl. And so Erin, I'm going to go ahead and ask the question unless you shout that you want to share it yourself. He was wondering if wind turbines have been observed to have any kind of negative effects on women's foods.
They have, they're affecting habitat of women's foods. So the ideal locations for wind turbines are ridge tops, and that's also areas that our first foods grown. So we've seen some loss of habitat, but also with Telecasset, we have, there's a wind project that went in there, but opened an opportunity for the tribes to access an area in there to gather bitterroot. And so that scenario happened to be positive, but otherwise we see kind of a loss of habitat with our women's foods.
Thank you. And is that more the effect of constructing those, or is there something about the vibration of the wind turbine, do you think, that has that effect?
It's the construction. There's the, they put in, roads and the pads for the windmills. And so it takes a lot of space is what, and that's how it's impacting.
Thank you. Sefa, I see that you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself and let us know what you're thinking?
My question's for Brosnan and Bobby. I just want to know if you guys thought about doing your great work over at McCoy Meadows. It could probably use a lot of the new you guys' first foods in that area.
Yeah, we've been actually, we're just talking about that as we're getting ready for the year and going to check places out. And we thought, man, that really seems like it'd be cool to work with the different land acquisitions and donations that are happening to just keep reconnecting this valley and this drainage. And so yeah, I think there is a lot of great opportunity there. We just haven't even gone out to check it out yet. So
oh yeah,
it's also Looking Glass too, and
it's a beautiful land base. It could really use some first foods enhancement.
Yeah, well, we definitely want to stay in touch and know what the needs are and know how we can work together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you, guys. We are at time, but I'm happy to keep this conversation going if we have people that want to pursue it. I just really quickly want to plug our next webinar. We don't have a set date for it, but we'll be announcing it pretty soon next week. I think we're looking at March 5th. And there is a time change on that one. So we will be moving that forward an hour, 12 to 2 p.m. We have our incident command team meets at 2 p.m. on Fridays, and we have a couple speakers on this presentation that are part of that team. And so we will be excited to share that out when that is finalized with you. And so if there is anybody else that wants to, do we want to continue on with questions? Who else would like to share, say something? Do our speakers have anything that they want to maybe close out with? Any kind of parting thoughts that they'd like to leave us with? Don't all crowd in at once. I think since we are at time, I will be respectful of everyone's time. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for sharing. And thank you to all of you for being here. We do have a raffle item. So we have our air quality monitor, and we will be working to get a better prize. So I know Dara Williams-Warden is looking for better raffle prizes for this. And so we are excited to continue to offer our webinar series. We're about halfway through. And so we are going to move out of First Foods themselves and into some of the ways that we interact with First Foods and bring them into our lives. And so our next webinar will be about built systems specifically. And so again, this is an opportunity for anyone to leave us with any final thoughts, anything that you might have forgotten to say during your presentation, anything that you want us to carry with us into the weekend, the spirit of the land. Please speak up. Bobby, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if you wouldn't mind sharing just some words for us to carry with us into the weekends.
Yeah, you know, I just want to again thank everybody for these continued efforts to, you know, steward and protect and perpetuate and enhance our food systems. You know, we're the continuation of a really old story, and the choices we make do matter and decide the future for our people and for our homelands. And no matter where you're coming from in life, you know, there's something to be done, and we all have a role to fill in this story. And so, you know, I just encourage people to, you know, take the time to get quiet with yourself and with the world and figure out, you know, where you fit in that. And for those that are really working hard on a lot of this stuff, you know, just know you're appreciated and know that you're not alone in this. It can be sometimes feel like a lonely endeavor, caring about the web of life in the midst of some of the things we're facing. And you know, so I just want everyone to just feel supported. And you know, I really feel like we have an awesome opportunity here in our homeland to build resilience. And like Cheryl was saying, we've adapted and flexed and been resilient in the face of a lot of changes, and there's no reason why we can't moving forward now. So I really appreciate everybody and everybody's input. So yeah, Kwatla Shamatash. Thank you all.
Thank you. And I think that that's a perfect place to end. So I hope everyone has a really wonderful weekend, and we will see you on the next one. Achle Mash Kinuta. Bye-bye.